The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Different numbers. Same message. $500,000 for a dog's life. Mike Cross stared at Shadow, his retired K-9 partner, and saw the German Shepherd's ears pin back in warning. Something was wrong. The rain hammered against the cabin windows like bullets, and through the darkness, Mike could see headlights approaching. They had found them. When Anthony Castellano Junior got 25 years in federal prison, his Billionaire Mafia father didn't blame the justice system or the prosecutors. He blamed the dog. The same dog that had alerted during a routine traffic stop 2 years ago. The same dog whose nose had found the hidden compartment with 3 kilograms of heroin and a ledger that destroyed an entire criminal empire. Castellano Sr. was worth $800 million, built on decades of corruption and violence. He was untouchable by law, but his only son was behind bars. And someone had to pay. Now, professional killers were coming up the driveway, and Mike had a choice. Hand over his best friend to be executed, or run for their lives through the Montana wilderness with an army of mercenaries on their trail. Shadow had saved Mike's life countless times during their years on the force, pulling him from burning buildings, taking down armed suspects, finding explosives that would have killed dozens. The 10-year-old German Shepherd with the distinctive white-gray coat and scarred muzzle had been more than a partner. He had been family. Now it was Mike's turn to protect him. But with a $500,000 bounty, helicopters searching from above, thermal imaging cutting through the darkness, and the unlimited resources of a mafia kingpin hunting them, their chances of surviving the next 48 hours seemed impossible. The voice on the megaphone outside gave them 60 seconds to surrender the dog. Mike looked at Shadow one more time, grabbed his weapon, and made his decision. They were running. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The rain hammered against the cabin windows like bullets, each drop a reminder that nowhere was truly safe anymore. Mike Cross sat in his worn leather chair, the kind of furniture that had absorbed years of weight and worry, watching Shadow pace near the front door. The German Shepherd's ears were pinned forward, his distinctive white-gray coat bristling along his spine. In 10 years of partnership, Mike had learned to read every twitch, every movement of his former K-9 companion. Right now, Shadow was telling him something was wrong. Mike's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. A number he didn't recognize. He let it ring. The 4th call in 2 hours from different numbers. They all went to voicemail. They all delivered the same message. A digitally altered voice, mechanical and cold, repeating the same words. $500,000. That was the price on Shadow's head 3 days ago. Anthony Castellano Jr. had been sentenced to 25 years in a federal prison. The conviction had been airtight. Trafficking, racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder. But the key piece of evidence, the thing that had unraveled the entire operation, had come from Shadow. During a routine traffic stop 2 years earlier, when Mike was still on the force, Shadow had alerted to Castellano's vehicle. Inside the hidden compartment beneath the trunk, they had found 3 kilograms of uncut heroin and a ledger. That ledger contained names, dates, transactions. It had taken down half of the Castellano crime family's East Coast operations. Anthony Castellano Sr., the patriarch, hadn't taken the news well. Forbes estimated his net worth at $800 million, built on decades of legitimate business fronts and very illegitimate backroom deals. He was untouchable, or so everyone believed. But his son, his only son, that was different. And now, someone had to pay. Mike stood and walked to the window, careful to stay to the side, out of the direct line of sight. Old habits. The cabin was isolated, 20 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by dense Montana wilderness. He had chosen this place specifically for its remoteness. After 30 years on the force, after Shadow's retirement from the K-9 unit, Mike wanted peace. What he got instead was a target on both their backs. Shadow growled low in his throat, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards. Mike's hand instinctively moved to his hip, where his service weapon used to sit. Now he kept it in a safe, locked away with the idea that he was done with that life. He walked to the bedroom, entered the combination, and pulled out his Glock. The weight felt familiar, comforting. Dangerous outside. Through the rain-blurred glass, Mike saw headlights cutting through the darkness. 2 vehicles, coming up the long gravel drive. They moved slowly, deliberately. Not lost travelers. Shadow's growl intensified. Mike checked the magazine. 15 rounds. And chambered one. He moved to the living room, killed the lights, and positioned himself behind the heavy oak bookshelf that offered cover and a clear line of sight to the front door. The vehicles stopped 50 yards from the cabin. Their headlights stayed on, creating a blinding wall of light that made it impossible to see who or what was inside. Mike's heart rate slowed, the old training taking over. Assess. Anticipate. Act. Shadow moved beside him, pressing against his leg. Ready. A car door opened. Then, another. Mike counted 4 distinct sounds. 4 people. The rain muffled footsteps, but he could make out shapes moving through the light. Then, a voice called out, amplified by a megaphone, "We're not here to hurt you, Mr. Cross. We just want the dog. Give us the dog, and you walk away. You have 60 seconds to decide." Mike didn't respond. 60 seconds was a negotiating tactic, a way to create pressure and force a mistake. He had used the same technique 100 times during his career. The silence stretched. Shadow remained perfectly still, his training evident even after 2 years of retirement. Outside, the shapes moved, spreading out in what looked like a tactical formation. These weren't street thugs. These were professionals. 45 seconds. The voice announced, "We know you're former law enforcement. We know you're smart. But $500,000 buys a lot of motivation, Mr. Cross. People who are very good at what they do. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Mike's mind raced through options. The cabin had 2 exits. Front and back. Windows on all sides, but most were too small to climb through quickly. The vehicles blocked the front drive, which meant the back door led into thick forest. Difficult terrain, especially in the dark and rain, but it was their best chance. He couldn't fight 4 armed professionals in a defensible position like this. The moment they breached, it was over. He moved quietly toward the back of the cabin, Shadow following without a sound. The rear door led to a small porch, then 20 yards of clearing before the tree line. Mike grabbed his jacket, stuffed extra magazines in the pockets, and pulled a flashlight from the drawer. He considered taking supplies, but there wasn't time. They needed to move now. "Time's up, Mr. Cross." The front windows exploded inward. Glass shattered, and canisters tumbled across the floor, hissing white smoke. Tear gas. Mike had already anticipated it. He threw open the back door and ran, Shadow launching beside him like a silver missile. The rain was actually an advantage now, washing away some of the gas and covering the sound of their escape. They hit the tree line in seconds, plunging into the darkness of the forest. Behind them, Mike heard shouts. Flashlight beams cut through the trees, searching. He kept moving, his hand on Shadow's collar, guiding them deeper into the wilderness. The forest floor was slick with mud and pine needles, treacherous footing, but Mike knew this land. He had hiked these trails dozens of times. There was an old logging road about half a mile east, rarely used, that connected to the main highway. If they could reach it, they might find help. Shadow suddenly stopped, his body going rigid. Mike froze. Ahead, through the rain and darkness, he heard voices. They had circled around, cutting off the obvious escape route. Mike cursed silently. These weren't just professionals. They were hunters who knew how to track prey. He changed direction, moving north instead, toward rougher terrain. The ground began to slope upward, becoming rocky and unstable. 20 minutes of hard climbing brought them to a ridge. Mike paused, catching his breath, his lungs burning. He was 48, not 25 anymore. Shadow seemed barely winded, his stamina still impressive despite his age. Below, Mike could see flashlight beams sweeping the forest in a coordinated search pattern. At least 6 lights now. More had joined the hunt. His phone buzzed. Another call. This time, Mike answered. A different voice came through, smooth and cultured, with just a hint of an Italian accent. Mr. Cross, this is becoming tiresome. You cannot run forever. I am a reasonable man. Let me make you an offer. $1 million. Cash. Untraceable. All you have to do is walk away. Leave the dog. Go start a new life somewhere warm. Hawaii, perhaps. The Bahamas. Somewhere far from all this unpleasantness, Mike recognized the voice from news reports. Anthony Castellano Junior. The man himself. Mike kept his own voice steady. Your son committed crimes. He's in prison because of what he did, not because of my dog. Castellano's laugh was soft, almost paternal. My son is in prison because someone had to take the fall. That's how this works, Mr. Cross. You know that. But the dog made it personal. That animal destroyed my family. And now I will destroy him. You have a choice. Take the money, or die with the animal. Those are your only options. Mike ended the call. There was nothing more to say. The rain intensified, turning from a steady pour into a torrential downpour. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Mike used the weather as cover, moving along the ridgeline, trying to put distance between them and the search party. His clothes were soaked through, and the cold was starting to seep into his bones. Shadow's thick coat provided better insulation, but Mike could see the dog was beginning to tire. They needed shelter, even temporarily, to regroup and plan their next move ahead. Mike remembered an old fire watchtower, abandoned for years. It was maybe 2 miles northwest, perched on the highest point in this section of forest. The structure would be dilapidated, possibly unsafe, but it would give them height advantage and a place to assess the situation. He changed course, pushing through the undergrowth, Shadow staying close. The climb took 40 minutes. By the time they reached the base of the watchtower, Mike's legs were shaking with exhaustion. The tower loomed above them, a skeletal structure of rusted metal and rotting wood. The stairs looked questionable, but Mike tested them carefully, distributing his weight. They held. He and Shadow climbed slowly, each step groaning under their weight, until they reached the small observation room at the top. The room was barely 8 feet square, windows on all sides, most of the glass long gone. Wind and rain whipped through the openings, but at least they were off the ground. Mike could see for miles, despite the darkness. Below, the flashlights continued their search, but they were moving away, following the wrong trail. Mike allowed himself a moment to breathe. Shadow shook himself, spraying water everywhere, then settled next to Mike. The dog's amber eyes reflected what little light penetrated the storm. Mike reached out, running his hand along Shadow's scarred muzzle. This animal had saved his life more times than he could count. During their years together on the force, Shadow had taken down armed suspects, found missing children, detected explosives that would have killed dozens. The idea of handing him over to be executed was unthinkable. Mike pulled out his phone. The signal was weak but present. He needed help, but who could he trust? The local police were small town, understaffed, and likely outgunned by Castellano's resources. The FBI might be an option, but jurisdiction issues would slow everything down. By the time they mobilized, It would be too late. He scrolled through his contacts, past dozens of names from his old life, until he landed on one. Sarah Chen, a former colleague who had left the force 2 years before him to work private security. He dialed. It rang 4 times before she answered, her voice groggy. "Mike, it's 3 in the morning. This better be good." Mike explained the situation in short, efficient sentences. Sarah listened without interrupting. When he finished, there was a long pause. Then she said, "You're describing a military-style operation. Castellano must have hired contractors, probably former special forces. These guys don't quit, Mike. They get paid when the job is done, I know," Mike replied. "I need options." Sarah's voice sharpened, the sleep gone. "How far are you from the Canadian border?" Mike calculated. "About 60 miles, maybe less." Sarah continued. "Get to Canada. Once you're across, Castellano's reach gets complicated. It's not impossible for him, but it's harder. Diplomatic issues, extradition laws, different law enforcement jurisdictions. It buys you time." "Time for what?" Mike asked. "Time for me to make some calls." Sarah said, "I know people. People who owe me favors. Give me 24 hours. Can you stay alive for 24 hours? Mike looked at Shadow, then down at the forest below, where the hunters continued their search. "I'll try." Dawn came slowly, the storm finally breaking, just as pale light began filtering through the clouds. Mike hadn't slept. He had spent the night watching the search patterns below, memorizing movements, counting personnel. He had confirmed at least 8 individuals, moving in coordinated pairs, maintaining radio contact, professional in every aspect. They had equipment, night vision, thermal imaging, possibly, and definitely weapons. He had seen the tactical vests, the rifles. Shadow had dozed fitfully, waking at every sound. Now, with daylight arriving, both of them needed to move. Staying in one place too long was suicide. Mike checked his phone. 42% battery remaining. He needed to conserve power. The Canadian border was 60 miles north. On foot, through wilderness, that was 2 days minimum, possibly 3. Without proper supplies, it would be brutal. They descended from the tower carefully. At the bottom, Mike paused, listening. The forest had come alive with morning sounds, birds calling, insects buzzing, the normal symphony of nature. But underneath it, he heard something else. Engines. Distant, but growing closer. They were bringing in vehicles, probably ATVs that could navigate the rough terrain. The net was tightening. Mike chose to move parallel to the ridgeline, staying in the thick forest where vehicles couldn't follow easily. The going was slow. Fallen logs, dense underbrush, and steep ravines made every mile exhausting. Shadow ranged ahead, his training reasserting itself, scouting the path, alerting to dangers. Twice, the dog froze, signaling someone nearby. Both times, Mike changed direction, circling wide to avoid contact. By noon, they had covered maybe 8 miles. Mike's stomach was cramping with hunger, and his throat was raw with thirst. They came across a small stream, and both drank deeply. Mike refilled his water bottle, wishing he had purification tablets, but at this point, giardia was the least of his problems. He noticed Shadow favoring his left front paw. Mike examined it. A small cut, not serious, but enough to slow them down. He tore a strip from his shirt and wrapped it as best he could. His phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. It contained a single photograph. Mike's breath caught. It was his cabin, or what was left of it. The building was engulfed in flames, black smoke pouring into the sky. The message that followed was short and direct. "You can't hide. We will find you. And when we do, you will watch the dog die before we kill you too." Mike deleted the message and kept moving. Anger was useless. Fear was useless. Only action mattered. He pushed harder, forcing his tired legs to cover ground faster. Shadow kept pace, limping slightly but determined. The dog seemed to understand what was at stake. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Mike heard a new sound. Helicopters. 2 of them, flying search patterns, crisscrossing the forest below the tree canopy. Castellano was escalating, throwing more resources at the problem. Mike realized with cold certainty that Sarah's 24-hour timeline might be optimistic. They needed to reach the border faster. They came across an old logging road, overgrown but still passable. Mike hesitated. Roads were dangerous, exposed, but they also meant speed. He decided to risk it, moving along the edge, ready to dive into cover at the first sign of trouble. The road led generally north, which was their direction anyway. They made good time for about an hour. Then Shadow stopped abruptly, his body going rigid, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Mike heard it a second later. The sound of an engine, coming up behind them. He pulled Shadow into the underbrush, just as a black SUV rounded the curve, moving slowly, searchlights mounted on the roof sweeping the road. 2 men inside, both armed. Mike and Shadow pressed flat against the ground, hidden by ferns and fallen logs, barely breathing. As the vehicle crawled past, the SUV disappeared around the next bend, but Mike knew they couldn't stay on the road. Too exposed. He led Shadow deeper into the forest, moving at an angle that would eventually intersect with the border, but through terrain so rough that vehicles couldn't follow. The cost was speed. They were moving at maybe 2 miles per hour now, exhaustion making every step an effort. As darkness fell again, Mike found a massive fallen cedar tree, its trunk hollow from rot. The interior was dry, protected from the elements, just large enough for both of them to squeeze inside. It wasn't comfortable, but it was hidden. Mike pulled out his phone. 21% battery. He risked turning it on. 3 missed calls from Sarah. He called her back. Her voice was tense. "Mike, where are you? I've got movement on my end." Castellano put out word through the contractor networks. "Half the mercenaries on the West Coast are heading your way. This isn't just about revenge anymore. It's about reputation. If he lets you get away, he looks weak. He can't afford that." Mike gave her their approximate coordinates. Sarah was silent for a moment, then said, "You're still 40 miles from the border. At your current pace, that's another day and a half. I don't think you have that much time." Mike asked, "What are my options?" Sarah replied, "I'm working on something. There's a guy, ex-Marine, runs a wilderness guide service near the border. He owes me. I'm trying to reach him. If I can, he might be able to meet you halfway, provide transportation. But Mike, you need to understand. Castellano has deep pockets. Anyone helping you is taking a huge risk." "I understand," Mike said. "Just tell me where to go." Sarah gave him new coordinates. A location about 20 miles north. An old fire service station, abandoned. If her contact agreed to help, that's where he would meet them. Noon tomorrow. Mike confirmed and ended the call. 20 miles. Through mountains. With hunters on their trail. It seemed impossible. But impossible was all they had left. The night was long and cold. Mike dozed in short intervals, jerking awake at every sound. Shadow slept pressed against him, providing warmth. When dawn finally came, Mike was stiff and sore, his muscles protesting every movement. They crawled out of the hollow tree and started moving immediately. No time for rest. The morning brought fog, thick and disorienting. Visibility dropped to maybe 30 feet. Mike used his compass, trusting the bearings Sarah had given him. The terrain was brutal, steep climbs followed by treacherous descents. Several times, Mike slipped, catching himself at the last second before tumbling down rocky slopes. Shadow navigated better, his 4 legs and lower center of gravity providing stability, By mid-morning, they heard voices again. Close. Too close. Mike and Shadow froze. Through the fog, shapes materialized. 3 men, dressed in tactical gear, moving in a loose formation. They hadn't seen Mike yet. He had seconds to decide. Fight or hide. With 3 armed professionals, fighting was suicide. He signaled Shadow to stay silent and low, then slowly backed away, 1 step at a time, trying to make no sound. A branch snapped under his foot. The crack was deafening in the quiet forest. All 3 men turned, weapons coming up. Mike dove behind a tree as gunfire erupted, bullets tearing through the fog, splintering bark inches from his head. He drew his Glock and returned fire, not to hit, but to create space. Shadow was already moving, circling wide, a tactical maneuver they had executed hundreds of times during their years together. The dog disappeared into the fog like a ghost. One of the men screamed. Shadow had found him. Mike used the distraction to move, changing position, firing twice more. The other 2 men split up, trying to flank him. Mike's training took over completely now. Assess angles, control breathing, pick targets. He saw movement to his left, fired, heard a grunt of pain. Not a kill shot, but enough to take that shooter out of the fight. The 3rd man was smart, staying behind cover, not exposing himself. Mike heard him on the radio, calling for backup. That changed everything. Mike whistled sharply, the recall signal. Shadow appeared seconds later, blood on his muzzle, but uninjured. They ran, abandoning stealth for speed, crashing through the underbrush as more gunfire chased them. The firefight had cost them precious time and revealed their location. Mike knew the entire area would be swarming within the hour. He pushed harder, ignoring the burning in his lungs, the protests from his aging body. Shadow ran beside him, matching his pace, never falling behind. They covered 3 miles in less than 30 minutes, a brutal sprint through impossible terrain. Finally, Mike had to stop. He collapsed against a tree, chest heaving, vision swimming. Shadow paced nervously, ears swiveling, tracking sounds Mike couldn't hear. After a minute, to catch his breath, Mike checked his phone. 11% battery. He pulled up the coordinates Sarah had given him. They were close, maybe 5 miles from the fire service station. But 5 miles might as well be 50 if they were surrounded. The fog was lifting, burned away by late morning sun. Better visibility meant they could see threats coming, but it also meant they could be seen. Mike heard the helicopters again, multiple aircraft now, the sound echoing through the mountains. He looked up through the canopy and caught glimpses of them, circling, searching. They had infrared. They had resources. All Mike had was determination and a dog that refused to quit. They moved more carefully now, using available cover, avoiding open areas. The forest began to thin out, transitioning from dense wilderness to more managed timberland. Signs of human activity appeared. Old stumps, cleared paths, even trash left by hikers. Civilization was close. That meant both danger and opportunity. The fire service station appeared through the trees just before noon. It was a small cinder-block building, weathered and forgotten, windows boarded up, weeds growing through cracks in the parking lot. An old pickup truck sat near the building, its paint faded but engine running. A man leaned against it, maybe 60 years old, wearing flannel and jeans, a rifle slung over his shoulder. He watched Mike and Shadow emerge from the forest with calculating eyes. "You cross?" the man asked. His voice was rough, a lifetime of smoking evident in the rasp. Mike nodded. The man continued. "Sarah says you're in deep. Says Castellano wants your head." "That true?" Mike replied. "It's true." The man spat tobacco juice onto the gravel. "Castellano's bad news. Lost some good friends to his organization over the years. Name's Davis. Tom Davis. Sarah says you're one of the good ones." Says you deserve a chance. Mike felt a surge of hope for the first time in 2 days. Davis gestured to the truck. Get in. Border's 15 miles. I know a crossing. Unofficial. Used by smugglers. We can be across in 30 minutes. Mike and Shadow moved toward the truck. Then Shadow stopped, his entire body going rigid, a warning growl building in his throat. Mike spun around. 4 SUVs were racing up the access road, kicking up dust, moving fast. They had been followed. Or tracked. Or maybe Davis had been compromised. Mike didn't have time to figure out which. He drew his weapon, backing toward the building. Davis cursed and brought his rifle up. The SUVs screeched to a stop, doors flying open, men pouring out. At least 12 of them, all armed, all professional, a voice called out, amplified by a megaphone. Thomas Davis, step away from the fugitive. You are interfering with a lawful bounty collection. Mike nearly laughed at the absurdity. Lawful bounty. As if murder contracts were legitimate. Davis didn't move. He called back, I don't see any badges. Far as I'm concerned, you're trespassing. The voice responded, final warning. Step away or be considered hostile. Davis looked at Mike, a slight smile on his weathered face. Well, I guess we're doing this the hard way. He opened fire. The crack of his rifle was deafening. One of the contractors went down, clutching his leg. Chaos erupted. The contractors returned fire, bullets hammering the truck and building. Mike and Davis dove for cover, Shadow moving with them. Pressing against the cinderblock wall, they were pinned down, outnumbered, and running out of time. Bullets tore through the air, shattering what remained of the station's windows, pinging off metal, kicking up concrete dust. Mike counted rounds. He had maybe 20 bullets left between his weapon and spare magazines. Davis was firing methodically, picking shots, making each one count. But 12 against 2, with one of them 48 years old and exhausted, wasn't sustainable math. Mike's phone rang. Impossible timing. He almost ignored it, but the caller ID showed Sarah. He answered, shouting over the gunfire. Sarah, unless you're calling with an airstrike, this isn't a good time. Her response was urgent. Mike, listen carefully. I contacted the FBI. They're 15 minutes out. Helicopter. But you need to stay alive for 15 minutes. Can you do that? Mike looked at their situation. Pinned down. Surrounded. Low on ammunition. 15 minutes might as well be 15 hours. He told Sarah, I'll do my best, and ended the call. He turned to Davis. Help's coming. 15 minutes. Davis laughed, a sound without humor. 15 minutes in a firefight is a lifetime, son. But I've lived through worse. Let's make these bastards work for it. The contractors were advancing, using fire and movement tactics. One group providing cover, while another moved closer. Professional. Disciplined. Mike realized they were trying to take him alive, their shots carefully aimed to wound rather than kill. They wanted him to watch Shadow die, just like Castellano had promised. That gave Mike a small advantage. They would hesitate. He wouldn't. Shadow suddenly bolted from cover, moving so fast he was a blur. Mike shouted, but the dog was already committed. Shadow hit the nearest contractor like a missile, 70 pounds of muscle and teeth. The man went down screaming. 2 others turned their weapons toward Shadow. Mike didn't think. He rose from cover and fired, dropping both men with center mass shots. Instantly, return fire drove him back down, bullets tearing through the air where his head had been a second before. Davis was bleeding from his shoulder, but still fighting, his rifle barking steadily. Mike called to Shadow, the recall signal. The dog released the contractor he had taken down and sprinted back, diving behind cover, just as more bullets chewed up the ground where he had been. The contractor Shadow had attacked wasn't moving, his tactical vest torn, blood spreading across the dirt. 8 contractors left. Maybe. Hard to count through the smoke and chaos. Mike's ears were ringing from the gunfire. He checked his ammunition. 8 rounds in the magazine, 1 spare magazine left. 15 rounds total. Had to make them count. He risked a glance around the corner, immediately drew fire, but caught a glimpse of their positions. They were setting up for a final assault, preparing to overwhelm the station from multiple angles simultaneously. A new sound cut through the battle. Helicopter rotors, deep and powerful. Mike looked up. A black helicopter crested the tree line, FBI markings clearly visible. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker. "This is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. All armed individuals, drop your weapons immediately. This area is now under federal jurisdiction. Failure to comply will result in lethal force." The contractors hesitated. Their job was to collect a bounty, not fight the federal government. Several began lowering their weapons. But 3 others, the ones closest to Mike's position, made a different choice. They opened fire on the helicopter. Massive mistake. The helicopter's door gunner returned fire, a belt-fed machine gun that turned the contractor's position into a kill zone. Within seconds, it was over. The helicopter landed in the parking lot, dust and debris swirling. 6 FBI agents emerged, weapons ready, securing the area with practiced efficiency. An agent in a suit approached Mike, his badge held high. "Michael Cross." Mike nodded, too exhausted to speak. The agent continued, "I'm Special Agent Rodriguez. Sarah Chen called in a lot of favors to get us here. You're safe now. Both of you." Mike looked at Shadow, who sat beside him panting but alert. The dog's amber eyes met his, and Mike saw the same determination that had carried them through 2 days of hell. Safe. The word felt foreign. The FBI took Mike and Shadow to a secure location, a safe house outside Seattle. The next 48 hours were a blur of debriefings, medical examinations, and endless questions. Mike learned that 5 of Castellano's contractors had been killed in the firefight, 4 others arrested. Tom Davis had survived his shoulder wound and was being treated as a hero. The media had gotten hold of the story, and it was everywhere. Retired cop and K-9 hero hunted by mafia boss. Dramatic FBI rescue. Anthony Castellano Junior had gone silent. His lawyers released a statement denying any involvement in the attacks, claiming it was unauthorized action by rogue elements. No one believed it, but proving it was another matter. The FBI was building a case, but it would take time. Meanwhile, Mike and Shadow remained in protective custody. On the 3rd day, Sarah Chen visited. She looked tired but satisfied. Mike met her in the safe house living room, Shadow at his side as always. Sarah smiled. "You look terrible," she said. Mike managed a weak grin. "I feel terrible. Thanks for saving our lives." Sarah waved it off. "You would have done the same for me. Besides, I couldn't let Castellano win." Bad precedent. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Sarah said, "The FBI wants to use you. They're offering full protection, new identities, relocation, the whole witness protection package. In exchange, you testify against Castellano. Help them build a RICO case." Mike had expected this. "What are my chances?" Sarah's expression turned serious. "Honestly, 50-50. Castellano has resources. Even in prison, he has reach. You'd be looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life." Mike looked at Shadow. "And him?" Sarah nodded. "Shadow too. You're a package deal." Mike spent the rest of the day thinking. Running forever wasn't living. It was just existing. But what choice did he have? Castellano had made his intentions clear. The man wouldn't stop. Unless an idea began forming. Dangerous. Possibly stupid. But it might be the only way to end this permanently. That night, Mike requested a meeting with Agent Rodriguez. The FBI agent listened to Mike's proposal with growing concern. "Mr. Cross, what you're suggesting is incredibly risky. We can't guarantee your safety." Mike replied, "You can't guarantee it anyway." "Not really. Castellano will keep trying. But if we do this my way, we end it." Rodriguez studied him for a long moment, then said, "I'll need to run it up the chain. Give me 24 hours. The plan was simple in concept, complicated in execution." Mike would agree to testify, but publicly, with media coverage, at a press conference. He would lay out everything. The bounty, the contractors, the manhunt, all of it. He would dare Castellano to come after him again, knowing the entire world would be watching. The FBI hated it. Too exposed, too dangerous. But Mike was insistent. The only way to stop running was to stand still. 3 days later, the press conference was scheduled. Federal courthouse in Seattle, maximum security, dozens of agents, media from around the world. Mike stood at the podium, Shadow sitting beside him, cameras flashing. He told the story, every detail, holding nothing back. He described the cabin burning, the firefight at the border station, the mercenaries hunting them through the forest. He named Anthony Castellano Junior as the architect of it all. The room erupted with questions, but Mike ignored them. He looked directly into the cameras and said, "Mr. Castellano, you sent killers after an innocent animal because you couldn't accept that your son was a criminal. You burned my home. You tried to murder me. And you failed. The law will find you. Justice will find you. And when it does, I'll be there to see it." He stepped away from the podium. Shadow followed. The room exploded with shouting reporters, but Mike was done talking. The fallout was immediate. Castellano's legal team went into overdrive, threatening lawsuits, demanding retractions. But the damage was done. Public opinion had turned decisively against him. The FBI's investigation accelerated. Witnesses who had been too afraid to talk suddenly found courage. Within 2 weeks, federal indictments were filed. Anthony Castellano Sr. was arrested at his estate in New Jersey on a gray morning in late November. The media circus was massive. Helicopters overhead. Reporters camped outside the gates. Mike watched it on television from the safe house, Shadow asleep at his feet. The sight should have brought satisfaction, but mostly Mike just felt tired. The trial took 8 months. Mike testified for 2 days, recounting everything. Defense attorneys tried to shake his credibility, implied he was motivated by vendetta, suggested he had fabricated evidence. But the jury saw through it. They saw an honest cop who had almost died protecting his partner. When the verdict came, guilty on 17 counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, Mike allowed himself a moment of relief. Castellano was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. At 72 years old, it was effectively a life sentence. The judge was particularly harsh, noting that Castellano had abused wealth and power to place a bounty on an innocent animal, showing a complete disregard for life and law. As marshals led him away, Castellano looked directly at Mike across the courtroom. His expression was unreadable. No anger, no remorse, just acknowledgement. This chapter was closed. The FBI kept Mike and Shadow in protective custody for another month, monitoring for retaliation from remaining Castellano associates. But none came. With the old man in prison and the organization in chaos, no one wanted to continue a vendetta that had already cost so much. Gradually, the security protocols relaxed. Mike was allowed to return to something resembling normal life. Sarah helped him find a new place, a small house on the coast of Oregon, far from Montana, far from Seattle, far from old memories. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of place Mike had dreamed about during his years on the force. He and Shadow settled into a routine. Morning walks on the beach, afternoons reading, evenings watching the sunset. It was healing, slowly erasing the trauma of those terrible days in the forest. But Mike couldn't completely let go of his old life. He started consulting, helping local police departments train their K-9 units, sharing lessons learned from decades of experience. It gave him purpose, and it introduced him to others who understood what he and Shadow had been through. The K-9 handler community was tight-knit, a brotherhood forged through shared danger and trust in their four-legged partners. 6 months after Castellano's conviction, Mike received a letter. It was from Anthony Castellano Junior, writing from federal prison. Mike almost threw it away without reading, but curiosity got the better of him. The letter was short. It said, "My father was wrong. What he did to you and your dog was unforgivable. I'm writing to apologize, not for myself, but for him. He won't do it, and someone should. You were just doing your job. I committed crimes and deserved to be caught. I'm sorry for everything my family put you through. I hope you and your dog find peace." Mike read it twice, then burned it. Apologies didn't undo the past, but maybe they allowed the future to be different. He looked at Shadow, who was sleeping in a patch of sunlight by the window. The dog's gray muzzle was getting more gray, his movements a little slower, his naps a little longer. But he was alive. They both were. Against all odds, they had survived. One evening, Mike sat on his porch overlooking the ocean, Shadow beside him. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Mike scratched behind Shadow's ears, a gesture so familiar it was automatic. "You know, buddy, we've been through a lot," he said quietly. Shadow's tail thumped against the wooden planks, a simple acknowledgement. "We survived because we didn't give up. Because we trusted each other. Because you're the best partner I've ever had." Shadow looked up at him with those amber eyes, and Mike swore the dog understood every word. A year passed. Then, another. The story of Mike Cross and Shadow became something of a legend in law enforcement circles. They were invited to speak at police academies, K-9 training seminars, conferences. Mike always declined. He had no interest in being famous. He just wanted to live quietly with his partner and let the world move on without them, but peace has a way of being interrupted. On a cold February morning, Mike's phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, and he had learned to be cautious about unknown calls. But something made him answer. A woman's voice came through, shaky with emotion. "Mr. Cross, my name is Jennifer Hayes. You don't know me, but I need your help. My daughter is missing." Mike's instincts immediately sharpened. He asked careful questions. Jennifer's daughter, Emma, was 12 years old. She had disappeared 3 days ago while walking home from school. The police were investigating, but they had no leads, no evidence, nothing. Jennifer had heard about Mike and Shadow, about their history, about Shadow's reputation as one of the best tracking dogs in the country. She was desperate. "Please," she said, voice breaking. "Everyone says Shadow is retired, that you don't do this anymore. But you're my last hope." Mike looked at Shadow, who was watching him intently, as if sensing the weight of the conversation. The dog was 12 years old now, well past typical retirement age, even by K-9 standards. His joints were stiff with arthritis. His hearing wasn't what it used to be. But his nose was still sharp, and his heart was still willing. Mike made a decision. "Tell me where you are," he said to Jennifer. "We'll be there tomorrow." They drove through the night, arriving in the small Idaho town just after dawn. Jennifer met them at her house, her eyes red from crying. She showed Mike a shirt Emma had worn, gave him details about the route she took home, described the last place she was seen. Mike listened carefully, building a mental map. Then he looked at Shadow. "You ready for this, old friend?" Shadow's response was immediate. He stood, stretched, and moved to the door. Ready to work, they started at the school. Shadow sniffed the shirt, his entire body focused, processing scent molecules invisible to humans. Then he began to track, nose to the ground, following a trail only he could detect. Mike followed, Jennifer and 2 local police officers trailing behind. The path led away from the main road, into a wooded area behind the school. Shadow moved confidently, pausing occasionally to reorient, then continuing. An hour into the search, Shadow stopped at an old abandoned barn, his body going rigid, the alert signal Mike knew so well. Inside, they found Emma, cold and frightened but alive, hidden in a storage room. She had run away after an argument with her mother, gotten lost, and been too scared to find her way back. It wasn't the dramatic rescue Mike had feared, but it was no less important. Jennifer collapsed with relief, holding her daughter, sobbing, as they walked back to the car. One of the police officers said to Mike, "That dog's incredible." "How old did you say he was?" Mike smiled. 12. Ancient for a working dog. The officer shook his head in wonder. "He doesn't act ancient," Mike replied. "He's just doing what he's always done. Protecting people. Finding the lost. Being a hero." That evening, back at their Oregon home, Mike sat with Shadow on the porch. The rescue had taken a toll. The dog was exhausted, sleeping more deeply than usual. But there was a contentment in his rest, a satisfaction that comes from purpose fulfilled. Mike thought about the journey they'd been on together. From police work to retirement, from being hunted to fighting back, from survival to peace. It hadn't been the life Mike had planned, but it was the life he'd lived, and he wouldn't change it. Shadow woke, looked at Mike, and placed his head on Mike's knee. A simple gesture. Trust. Loyalty. Love. Mike stroked the dog's gray coat and said, "We made it, buddy. Through everything, we made it." Shadow's tail wagged slowly, contentedly. Outside, the ocean whispered against the shore, and the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new stories, new reasons to keep going. But tonight, they had earned their rest. Together. As always, the end.